$5 million. That's how much Al Capone offered Bumpy Johnson to become partners on September 3rd, 1931. $5 million in cash, delivered to Harlem in armored trucks. Enough money to buy 100 city blocks. Enough to live like royalty for 50 years. Enough to make Bumpy Johnson the richest black man in America. All Bumpy had to do was say yes. Share Harlem's numbers racket with Al Capone. Become junior partner to the most powerful gangster in the nation. Work under Chicago's control instead of running his own operation. $5 million. And Bumpy Johnson, sitting across from Al Capone in a Midtown Manhattan hotel suite, surrounded by Capone's armed enforcers, said two words that shocked everyone in the room. I refuse. Not, let me think about it. Not, I need to consult my partners. Just, I refuse. And then Bumpy stood up, turned his back on $5 million, and walked out of that hotel room. This is the story of the greatest rejection in criminal history. The story of how Bumpy Johnson chose independence over wealth, and the story of why Al Capone, for the first time in his career, respected a man who told him no. Early September 1931, New York City. The summer heat was finally breaking, but the temperature in the city's underworld was rising. Al Capone had come to New York with ambitions. He wanted a piece of every major operation. Lucky Luciano had agreed to a partnership. So had Meyer Lansky. Dutch Schultz had negotiated terms. The Italian mob, the Jewish syndicate, the Irish gangs. Everyone was making deals with Capone, except one territory, Harlem. In late August, Capone had tried to force his way into Harlem. He'd sent Tony Accardo with 5 men to eliminate Bumpy Johnson and take over the numbers racket. But Bumpy had been ready. He'd ambushed Capone's crew at 110th Street, killed 3 of them, wounded Accardo, sent them back to Chicago humiliated. It was a declaration of war. But instead of escalating, Capone had done something unexpected. He'd requested a meeting, face-to-face. Bumpy and Capone had met in a Brooklyn warehouse on August 25th, and instead of fighting, they'd negotiated. Capone agreed to stay out of Harlem. Bumpy agreed to stay out of Capone's New York operations. A truce, an understanding. But Al Capone wasn't satisfied with a truce. He wanted more, because Capone understood something most gangsters didn't. Harlem's numbers racket wasn't just profitable. It was strategic. Whoever controlled Harlem controlled the largest black population in America. And in 1931, that population was growing, migrating from the South, building communities, spending money, creating opportunities. Capone saw the potential, and he wanted in. But little did Bumpy know, Capone had been planning something bigger than a truce. September 1st, 1931, 2 days after Brooklyn warehouse meeting, Al Capone called a private conference with his top advisors. Jake Guzik, his financial brain, Frank Nitti, his enforcer, Murray Humphreys, his political fixer, and Tony Accardo, still recovering from the Harlem ambush. Capone laid out his thinking. Bumpy Johnson is smart, tough, strategic. He's proven he can't be pushed around. So we're not going to push. We're going to offer him something he can't refuse. Guzik was skeptical. Boss, he already refused our initial offer. 25% of his operation. Why would he accept anything now? Capone smiled. Because I'm not offering to take from him. I'm offering to give to him. Money, resources, protection, a real partnership. Not me taking control, but us working together. Jake, how much cash do we have available? Guzik thought for a moment. Liquid? Maybe $8 million. Capone nodded. Prepare $5 million. Small bills. Unmarked. I'm going to make Bumpy Johnson an offer he literally can't refuse. Frank Nitti was confused. Boss, $5 million? That's a fortune. For what? For a partnership with Harlem. Capone explained. Here's how it works. I give Bumpy $5 million. Up front. No strings. It's his. In exchange, we become equal partners in Harlem's numbers operation. 50-50 split on all future profits. But Bumpy stays in control. Runs a day-to-day. Keeps his people. Keeps his reputation. I just get half the profits. And I provide capital, protection, and political connections. Guzik did the math quickly. Boss, Harlem's numbers make about $1 million a year. Half of that is $500,000. It would take 10 years just to break even on the initial investment. Capone leaned forward. This isn't about breaking even in 10 years. This is about the next 50 years. Harlem's growing. The numbers will grow. In 20 years, that operation could be worth $10 million a year. $20 million, and I'll own half of it. Plus, having Bumpy Johnson as a partner sends a message that I can work with anyone. Italian, Jewish, Irish, Black, that I'm building something bigger than Chicago. The men around the table slowly nodded. It was ambitious. Risky, but it was classic Capone. Thinking bigger than everyone else. Tony Accardo asked the obvious question. What if he says no again? Capone's answer was simple. Then we have our answer. Harlem can't be taken, and we leave it alone. But I don't think he'll say no. $5 million. That's more money than he'll see in his entire life. He'd be a fool to refuse. But here's what Capone didn't understand about Bumpy Johnson. Money wasn't everything. September 2nd, 1931. Bumpy received a message at Small's Paradise. An envelope delivered by a well-dressed messenger. Inside was a note, handwritten, on expensive paper. Mr. Johnson, I'd like to continue our conversation. Please meet me tomorrow, September 3rd, at noon. The Plaza Hotel. Suite 500. Come alone. We have much to discuss. The note was signed. Al Capone. Bumpy showed the note to Madame Stephanie St. Clair and Illinois Gordon. St. Clair was worried. It could be a trap. Capone might be planning revenge for the ambush. Illinois agreed. Boss, you can't go alone. Let me come with you. Bumpy shook his head. If Capone wanted me dead, he'd send men to Harlem. He wouldn't invite me to the plaza. He wants to talk, and I want to hear what he has to say. But what Bumpy didn't expect was the scale of Capone's offer. September 3rd, 1931. 11:55 in the morning. Bumpy Johnson walked into the Plaza Hotel, 5th Avenue and 59th Street, one of the most luxurious hotels in New York. The lobby was marble and gold, chandeliers hanging from high ceilings, wealthy guests in expensive clothes. Bumpy stood out, not because he was underdressed. His suit was immaculate, but because he was black. In 1931, black guests at the plaza were rare. Bumpy took the elevator to the 5th floor, found Suite 500, knocked. The door opened immediately. Tony Accardo stood there, his arm still in a sling from the gunshot wound. He gestured for Bumpy to enter. No words, just a nod. Inside, the suite was massive. Living room, dining room, multiple bedrooms. And in the center of the living room, sitting in a leather chair like a king on a throne, was Al Capone. Capone stood when Bumpy entered, extended his hand. Mr. Johnson, thank you for coming. Bumpy shook his hand. Firm grip, eye contact, two men sizing each other up. Capone gestured to a chair across from him. Please, sit, let's talk. Bumpy sat. Around the room were 6 of Capone's men, armed, watching, but not threatening, just present. Capone poured 2 glasses of whiskey, handed one to Bumpy, to new possibilities. They drank. Then Capone got down to business. I'll be direct. I respect you. You stood up to me. You fought my men. You protected your territory. That takes courage and intelligence. Most men would have folded. You didn't. So I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here to offer you something. Bumpy waited, listening. Capone continued. I want to be your partner. Not your boss. Your equal partner. 50-50 split on everything Harlem makes. You run the operations. You keep your people. You make all the day-to-day decisions. I just provide resources, capital, protection, political connections, and I get half the profits. Bumpy's expression didn't change. That's the same offer your man Nitty made last month, except now you're calling it a partnership instead of a takeover. Capone smiled. That's where you're wrong. Nitty offered you nothing, just demanded 25%. I'm offering you something very different. Capone snapped his fingers. Frank Nitti walked in from one of the bedrooms, carrying 2 large leather suitcases. He set them on the table between Bumpy and Capone and opened them. Inside was money, stacks of cash, $100 bills, more money than Bumpy had ever seen in one place. $5 million, Capone said. It's yours, right now, before we sign anything, before we agree to anything. This money is yours. Take it, buy property, invest it, save it. I don't care. It's a gift, a show of good faith. And then we become partners. 50-50. Moving forward. Bumpy stared at the money. $5 million. He did the math quickly. The entire Harlem Numbers operation made about $1 million a year. This was 5 years of total revenue. In cash. Right now, any smart businessman would take it. But that's when Bumpy said something that shocked everyone in the room. What happens to Harlem? Capone was confused. What do you mean? If I take your money and become your partner, what happens to Harlem? To the people there? The runners, the collectors, the families who play the numbers. What changes for them? Capone's answer was honest. Nothing changes. You keep running it the same way. Your people keep their jobs. The only difference is you report profits to me, and I send resources when you need them. Bumpy leaned back in his chair. So Harlem stays the same. Except now it's partly owned by a white gangster from Chicago. Except now the people there know that their money goes to Al Capone. Except now I'm not the boss. I'm the manager, working for you. Capone tried to correct him. With me. Not for me. We're partners. Bumpy's response was quiet but firm. There's no such thing as equal partners when one partner has all the power. You're Al Capone. You run Chicago. You have connections I'll never have. Money I'll never have. If we disagree on something, your word wins. That's not a partnership. That's employment. Capone's tone changed. Slightly defensive. Mr. Johnson, I'm offering you $5 million. Most men would kill for that opportunity. Bumpy stood up. And that's why you don't understand Harlem. Most men would kill for money. But Harlem's not about money. It's about community. About black people controlling their own destiny. About not having an answer to white bosses. Even rich white bosses. Even powerful white bosses. Bumpy looked at the suitcases full of cash. Then back at Capone. I refuse. Capone's face showed genuine surprise. You refuse? $5 million? Bumpy nodded. I refuse. Harlem's not for sale. Not for $5 million. Not for $50 million. Because the moment I take your money, the moment I become your partner, Harlem stops being ours. It becomes yours. And I won't do that. Not to my community. Not to the people who trust me. Not for any amount of money. Capone stared at Bumpy. This was unprecedented. Nobody turned down Al Capone. Especially not when Capone was being generous. Respectful. Offering a fortune. But that's when Bumpy did something even more shocking. He turned to leave. Tony Accardo moved to block the door, his good hand on his pistol. Bumpy stopped, looked at Capone. Are we done being civilized? Capone held up his hand. Tony, let him go. Accardo was confused. Boss, he just refused $5 million. He insulted you. We can't let him walk out of here. Capone's voice was firm. I said let him go. Accardo stepped aside, and Bumpy Johnson walked toward the door. But before he left, Capone spoke one more time. Mr. Johnson. Wait. Bumpy turned. Capone stood up, walked to the suitcases, closed them, and looked at Bumpy with something that might have been respect. You're either the bravest man I've ever met, or the stupidest. I can't decide which. Bumpy's response was simple. Maybe both. Capone laughed. A genuine laugh. You know what? I like you. I still think you're making a mistake. But I respect it. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to keep my word from our last meeting. I stay out of Harlem. You stay out of my operations. And we leave it at that. No partnership. No deal. But no war either. Bumpy nodded. That works for me. Capone extended his hand one more time. And this time when they shook, it wasn't about business. It was about mutual respect. But what neither of them knew was that this moment would become legendary. Bumpy walked out of the Plaza Hotel, down the elevator, through the lobby, back onto Fifth Avenue, and he felt something he'd never felt before. Complete freedom. He'd just turned down $5 million and kept Harlem independent. Back in Suite 500, Jake Guzik turned to Capone. "Boss, I don't understand. Why'd you let him walk?" Capone sat down, poured another whiskey, and gave an answer that surprised everyone. Because he's right. Guzik was stunned. Right about what? Capone took a drink. About partnership. About power. I told him we'd be equals. But he knew better. He knew that the moment he took my money, he'd be working for me, not with me. And he chose independence over wealth. That's rare. That's valuable. And that's why I'm not going to fight him. Because men like Bumpy Johnson don't come along often. And destroying him would be a waste. Frank Nitti asked a question everyone was thinking. "So what do we do with the $5 million?" Capone smiled. "Put it back in the vault. We'll use it elsewhere. New York has plenty of other opportunities." Tony Accardo was frustrated. "Boss, with all due respect, you're letting him disrespect you. He walked out on your offer. What message does that send?" Capone's answer was immediate. "It sends a message that I respect strength, that I can be reasonable, that I don't destroy every man who says no to me. And that makes me more powerful, not less." The room went quiet, because everyone understood. Capone had just elevated himself. By letting Bumpy go, by respecting his decision, Capone had proven he was more than a thug. He was a businessman, a strategist, a man who understood that sometimes losing a battle wins you respect. But here's what nobody in that room expected. The news of Bumpy's rejection would spread, and it would change everything. September 4th, 1931. The next day, word leaked out of the Plaza Hotel. A bellhop had overheard part of the conversation. A maid had seen the suitcases full of cash. And within 24 hours, every gangster in New York knew. Bumpy Johnson had been offered $5 million by Al Capone, and he'd said no. The reaction was mixed. Some thought Bumpy was crazy. $5 million was a life-changing fortune. Others, especially in Harlem, understood. Bumpy had chosen community over cash, independence over wealth, pride over profit. Lucky Luciano heard the story and told Meyer Lansky, "This Bumpy kid's got principles. I respect that." Lansky agreed, "But I hope he knows what he's doing." Turning down Capone is one thing. Surviving without Capone's protection is another. But that's when the real twist happened. Other black gangsters across America heard the story, and they were inspired. In Chicago's South Side, a young enforcer named Eddie Anderson heard about Bumpy and decided he didn't have to work for white gangsters either. In Detroit's Black Bottom neighborhood, another hustler made the same decision. In Philadelphia, Baltimore, Cleveland, everywhere black organized crime existed, Bumpy's rejection became a symbol. You don't have to bow down. You don't have to take the money. You can stand on your own. And that terrified white gangsters. Because if black neighborhoods stopped being territories to exploit and became independent operations, the power structure would change. September 10th, 1931. 1 week after the Plaza meeting, Lucky Luciano called a conference. All the major New York bosses, Italian, Jewish, Irish. The topic was Bumpy Johnson. Luciano laid it out simply. Bumpy rejected Capone's offer. That's unprecedented. And it's inspiring black gangsters everywhere do the same. We need to decide. Do we respect it? Or do we crush it? Meyer Lansky spoke first. We respect it. Bumpy's proven he's smart, strategic, and he's got his neighborhood locked down. Fighting him would be expensive. And for what? Harlem makes $1 million a year. That's nothing compared to what we make elsewhere. Let him have it. Dutch Schultz disagreed. If we let Bumpy keep Harlem independent, other neighborhoods will want the same. The Bronx, Brooklyn, Queens will lose control. Luciano's response was firm. We don't control Harlem now. Bumpy does. And trying to take it from him costs more than it's worth. Capone learned that. We should learn from his example. The debate continued for hours. Finally, they took a vote, 7-3. They would respect Bumpy's independence. Harlem would remain autonomous, and any gangster who tried to take it without commission approval would face consequences. But what nobody knew was that this decision would protect Bumpy for decades. Because when Dutch Schultz tried to take Harlem in 1935, the commission remembered. They remembered that Harlem was independent, that Bumpy had earned that independence by standing up to Al Capone. And when Schultz pushed too hard, threatened to kill prosecutor Thomas Dewey, the commission had Schultz killed, partly to stop the Dewey assassination, but partly to protect Bumpy's Harlem. September 15, 1931, 2 weeks after rejecting Capone's offer, Bumpy held a meeting at Small's Paradise with Madame St. Clair and his top men. They'd heard the stories about the $5 million, about Bumpy walking out, about Capone letting him go. St. Clair asked the question everyone wanted to know. Do you regret it? Bumpy thought for a moment, then shook his head. No, that money would have come with strings. Invisible at first, but they'd tighten over time. Eventually, Harlem wouldn't be ours. It would be Capone's, and I'd just be his employee. I'd rather be poor and free than rich and owned. Illinois Gordon raised concern. Boss, what if we needed that money? What if we face a crisis? What if Dutch Schultz comes after us? What if the police crack down? Bumpy's answer revealed his long-term thinking. Then we handle it ourselves. We build alliances. We save money. We plan ahead, but we do it without selling our independence. Because once you sell it, you can never buy it back. The room was silent, because everyone understood. Bumpy hadn't just rejected money. He'd rejected the easy path, the safe path. He'd chosen the hard road, the risky road, but the road that kept Harlem free. And over the next 37 years, that decision would define everything Bumpy Johnson became. September 20th, 1931. Al Capone left New York, returned to Chicago. He'd made deals with Luciano, Lansky, and others. He'd established a presence in New York, but he'd failed to get Harlem. Before leaving, Capone told Jake Guzik something prophetic. That Bumpy Johnson is going to be a legend, not because of what he took, but because of what he refused. I offered him $5 million. He said no. That takes more courage than killing a man. That takes vision. And one day, people will understand why he did it. Guzik asked if Capone regretted letting Bumpy go. Capone's answer was honest. No, because forcing him would have cost more than $5 million. It would have cost lives, time, resources, and reputation. By letting him keep Harlem, I showed I can be reasonable, and that makes other gangsters more willing to work with me. So in a way, Bumpy Johnson did me a favor. He showed me that not every territory needs to be conquered. Some can be respected, and respected territories are more valuable than conquered ones in the long run. Those words would prove prophetic, because over the next decade, Capone's empire would crumble. Tax evasion, prison, syphilis, death. But Bumpy's Harlem would grow, strengthen, endure. All because on September 3rd, 1931, Bumpy Johnson said 2 words to Al Capone. I refuse. October 1931, just 1 month after Bumpy rejected Capone's offer. Al Capone was convicted of tax evasion, sentenced to 11 years in federal prison. His empire began to crumble. Frank Nitti took over, but it was never the same. Capone went to Atlanta Federal Prison, then Alcatraz in 1934. The most notorious gangster in America, locked away on a rock in San Francisco Bay. And while Capone rotted in prison, Bumpy Johnson's legend grew. The story of the $5 million rejection became folklore. In Harlem, people told it with pride. Bumpy chose us over money. He chose independence over wealth. That's a real leader. In white mob circles, the story became a cautionary tale. Don't underestimate black gangsters. Bumpy Johnson proved they're just as smart, just as strategic, maybe smarter, because they value things we don't. By 1935, for years after the rejection, Dutch Schultz tried to take Harlem by force. He sent dozens of men, spent millions, and got nowhere because Bumpy, still independent, still self-sufficient, fought back and won. When Schultz threatened to kill prosecutor Thomas Dewey, Lucky Luciano remembered the commission's decision from 1931. Harlem was independent, protected. So when Luciano ordered Schultz killed, it was partly to protect Bumpy, because Bumpy had earned the commission's respect by standing up to Al Capone. In 1947, Al Capone died. Syphilis, brain damage. A shell of the man who'd once ruled Chicago. He died in his Florida mansion. Forgotten by most, feared by none. But before he died, in one of his lucid moments, Capone told his brother Ralph something interesting. "Ralph, you remember that black gangster from Harlem? The one I offered $5 million to? Bumpy Johnson?" Ralph nodded. "What about him?" Capone smiled weakly. "He's still running Harlem. Still independent. Still free. And I'm here, dying, broke, forgotten. Maybe he was smarter than me." Ralph tried to argue, but Capone waved him off. No, he was smarter, because he understood something I didn't. Freedom's worth more than money. Independence is priceless. I conquered Chicago, but I was never free. Always looking over my shoulder. Always fighting. Always running. But Bumpy, he chose freedom. And he still got it. Those were some of the last coherent words Al Capone ever spoke. When Bumpy heard about Capone's death years later, he didn't celebrate. He just nodded and told Illinois Gordon something that revealed his philosophy. Capone was a great gangster, but he made one mistake. He thought power came from controlling everything, from owning everyone. But real power comes from knowing what to control and what to let go. I let go of $5 million, and I kept something more valuable: my independence, my community, my self-respect. In 1952, 21 years after rejecting Capone, Bumpy was convicted of drug conspiracy, sent to Alcatraz, the same prison where Capone had served. By then, Capone was long dead, but the guards remembered him. And when Bumpy arrived, one old guard told him a story. He said, "Capone used to talk about you. Said you were the only man who ever turned him down. Said he respected that more than anything." Bumpy asked what else Capone had said. The guard smiled. He said you were smarter than him, that you understood something he never did, that you can't buy everything. Some things have to be earned, and some things are worth more than money. Bumpy served at Alcatraz until 1963, 11 years. When he was released, he returned to Harlem, and for 5 more years, until his death on July 7, 1968, Bumpy Johnson ruled Harlem, still independent, still proud, still free. At Bumpy's funeral, thousands attended. Adam Clayton Powell Jr. spoke. Malcolm X's widow Betty Shabazz was there. Frank Lucas, Bumpy's protege, stood in the front row. And one of the stories told that day was about September 3rd, 1931, about the $5 million, about the rejection, about the choice that defined Bumpy's entire life. An old woman, someone who'd lived in Harlem since the 20s, told the story to younger generations. She said, Bumpy could have been rich, richer than any black man in America. Al Capone offered him a fortune, but Bumpy understood what money couldn't buy. He understood that being wealthy under a white boss was still being owned. That $5 million with strings was worth less than nothing with freedom. The old woman continued, and that's why we loved him. Not because he was a gangster, not because he was tough, but because he chose us. He chose Harlem. He chose independence. When every other gangster was selling out, bowing down, taking the money, Bumpy said no. And that no changed everything, because it showed us we didn't have to accept less. We didn't have to settle. We could be free. A young man in the crowd asked if Bumpy had ever regretted it. The old woman smiled. I asked him that once, in 1965, 3 years before he died. And you know what he said? He said he'd make the same choice 1,000 times. Because $5 million lasts maybe 20 years if you're smart. But pride, independence, freedom, those last forever. And he was right. Bumpy Johnson died 40 years ago. But we still tell his story. We still remember the day he turned down Al Capone. That's worth more than $5 million. That's priceless. The story of Bumpy rejecting Capone's partnership became more than just gangster lore. It became a symbol for civil rights activists who saw it as an example of black self-determination, for entrepreneurs who understood that some deals aren't worth taking, for anyone who'd ever had to choose between wealth and principles. In 1983, 15 years after Bumpy's death, a historian was researching Al Capone's life. He found a letter Capone had written in 1936 from prison. The letter was to Jake Guzik. In it, Capone mentioned Bumpy. He wrote, "I keep thinking about that Harlem fellow, Johnson. I offered him a fortune. He said no. At the time, I thought he was crazy. Now I wonder if I was a fool. I spent my whole life accumulating money. And where did it get me? Prison, sickness, ruin. But Johnson, he chose pride over profit. And from what I hear, he's still running his neighborhood, still free. Maybe there's a lesson there. Maybe some things can't be bought." The historian published a letter, and it confirmed what everyone in Harlem already knew. Bumpy Johnson had been right. September 3rd, 1931 wasn't just about rejecting money. It was about defining what kind of man Bumpy would be, what kind of leader, what kind of legend. Look, this story, whether it happened exactly this way or represents a broader truth, reveals something fundamental about Bumpy Johnson. He couldn't be bought. He couldn't be owned. He valued independence more than wealth, and that made him unique in the criminal underworld. Al Capone built an empire worth hundreds of millions, but he died broken, forgotten, destroyed by his own ambition. Bumpy Johnson never had that kind of money, but he died respected, celebrated, free, and his legacy endured. Because people remember the man who said no to Al Capone, who rejected $5 million to keep his community independent, who understood that some things matter more than money. September 3rd, 1931. A hotel suite at the Plaza. 2 leather suitcases filled with $5 million. And 2 words that changed everything. I refuse. Al Capone offered a partnership. Bumpy Johnson rejected it and kept all of Harlem. Not just the territory, but the pride, the independence, the freedom. That's what made Bumpy Johnson a legend. Not his violence, not his success, but his principles. His willingness to say no when everyone else said yes. His understanding that wealth without freedom is just another form of slavery. $5 million. Rejected, walked away from. And in walking away, Bumpy Johnson gained something worth far more. Respect, independence, legacy. Al Capone went to prison 1 month later, died broken 16 years after that. But Bumpy Johnson ruled Harlem for 37 more years. Free, proud, independent, all because he said no. I refuse. If this story about Bumpy Johnson's greatest rejection got your attention, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel because we're dropping true crime history stories every single week. Drop a comment and tell me, would you have taken the $5 million? Could you have walked away from that much money? And turn on notifications because next week we're telling the story of how Bumpy Johnson survived 15 assassination attempts and turned 3 of the hitmen into his own bodyguards. Remember, this is a dramatized fictional story. Al Capone and Bumpy Johnson never actually met. They operated in different cities and different eras. But this story represents the courage and principles that made Bumpy Johnson legendary. The willingness to value independence over wealth. The courage to say no to the most powerful gangster in America. And the wisdom to understand that some things can't be bought. September 3rd, 1931. $5 million. Rejected. I refuse. 2 words that defined a life. 2 words that build a legend. 2 words that prove money can't buy everything. Al Capone offered partnership. Bumpy Johnson rejected it and kept all of Harlem. Not just the streets, not just the money, but the freedom, the independence, the soul of the neighborhood. That's worth more than any amount of money. That's priceless. That's legendary. That's Bumpy Johnson.